Okay. All right. There we go. Okay, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Paranormal Graveyard, brought to you by Half Past Dead Paranormal and Beyond the Grave Radio. We have a interesting show for you guys tonight, and ladies. We're talking about serial killers, and ghosts are creepy, scary, spooky, all that stuff. But real live serial killers is a really creepy, makes you skin crawl kind of thing when you think about that, because that's realistic.
Absolutely.
I mean, beyond anything, that's realistic. So what we're going to do here is like we always do. Christina is going to lead us in.
Okay. Let me just get set up. All right. A serial killer is a person who murders 3 or more people, usually in service of abnormal psychological gratification, with the murders taking place over more than a month and including a significant break between them. Although psychological gratification is the usual motive for serial killing, and most serial killing involves sexual contact with the victim, the FBI states that the motives of serial killers can include anger, thrill-seeking, financial gain, and attention-seeking. The murders may be attempted or completed in a similar fashion, and the victims may have something in common: age group, appearance, gender, or race. Serial killing is not the same as mass murdering. Now, mass murdering is killing numerous people in a given incident, nor is it a killing spree, which is murders are committed in 2 or more locations in a short time. Now, Paranormal Graveyard has compiled a list of serial killers from our past history. The stories provided are real and are graphic. Parental advisory is a must. Paranormal Graveyard gives you the top 20 serial killers.
Awesome. Okay. I don't know if any of you guys, but now I've read about this one before, and it didn't dawn on me until I was looking in the list here. The Bloody Benders was like from the 1800s. And
Yes, it was.
While traveling the roads of Labette County, Kansas, you might have come across a small bed and breakfast inn owned by the Bender family. As travel was slow through horse and cart, you may have felt inclined to stop off for the night, especially if you were a man, as the Bender's daughter, Kate, was quite beautiful and curvy. Ooh. Unfortunately, should you stay the night, it was likely you were not going to leave again. She didn't look that good, people. I don't think I'm going to stay the night. The Bender family were all serial killers, and their list of victims was long. As you are shown in the place of honor at the dinner table, you probably would not take great notice of the thick curtain behind you that subdivided the little one-room cabin, or the trap door at your feet. Unfortunately, death was waiting for you there.
Nice.
Kate would serve you, entertain you with flirtatious conversation, her low-cut and loose shirt keeping you distracted. As this was taking place, John Bender, the family's patriarch, and his son would be standing right behind you, a heavy hammer in their hands. When the time was right, they would swing the hammer, smashing you in the side of the head. This would leave you unconscious or dead, but either way, you were soon to be finished off. The table would be removed or moved out of the way, and the trapdoor opened, where you would be slid below the house to have your throat cut, spilling your lifeblood onto the cellar floor. From here, you would have all your valuable possessions taken from you and then buried in one of the various burial grounds dotted around the Bender property. Maybe you would be buried whole, maybe in parts. It all depended on the bender's mood and whether you were easy to carry or not. The Bender family killed more than a dozen people at their property between 1871 and 1873. When the Benders knew they were after them because of all the disappearances, they fled. There was a massive outcry, and many people descended on the property to search it for the missing people. They opened the trapdoor and found it bloodstained. The floor was dug up and found that so much blood had seeped into it that they were still digging up clotted blood several feet down.
Wow.
The cabin was then lifted by several dozen men and carried some distance so the entire floor could be easily dug up. No bodies were found. However, when they started to dig in the vegetable garden and apple orchard, the bodies were discovered. One of the first found was Dr. York. A majority of the bodies were found to have one side of the head smashed in and their throats cut. Not all bodies were found in the ground, as some were discovered in the well, along with other dismembered remains. Many other people would be caught, tortured, and arrested under suspicion of being in cahoots with the Bender family or being a Bender. However, it is not known whether the Bender family themselves were ever caught. Bounties were put on their heads, and although several groups claimed to have captured and killed the Benders, none ever claimed a reward. You don't claim a reward, that means you didn't actually do what you said. Who's gonna go out of their way to capture and kill them
And
if
not
they're
claim
not
it.
going to claim the reward? You know,
Exactly.
that don't make sense to me. So anyway, many of the remains found on the property were never identified or claimed and were reburied near to where they were discovered. Now, why would they rebury them near where they were discovered? Why wouldn't they have put them in a cemetery?
They didn't know who they were.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's a good point.
You know, I mean, do the right thing. Give them a decent burial. It doesn't matter if you know who it is or not. You can put unknown on the marker.
But these people were never found either. And I remember seeing pictures of bodies being dug up, right next to each other, and they were just their bodies everywhere all over the property.
Yeah, kind of reminds you of John Wayne Gacy or something.
Yep. I think on one of our lists tonight too.
Magdalena
Solis. Yep, Magdalena Solis. She actually turned out to be one of the blood drinking vampires. Yeah, Magdalena Solis, date of birth is unknown. It is estimated it's about 1930s. As a young peasant girl, she sold her body for sex, and her brother Eliezer acted as her pimp. Now, her big break came when she and her brother were approached by the Hernandez brothers, a pair of criminals who had money-making scheme in mind with a bit of sexual motivation thrown in. The brothers planned on extorting the poor, suspicious peasant folk in the area out of their money and into their beds by showing them a god. Well, the main problem was with the Hernandez brothers' scheme was that they had chosen a brutal, sadistic madwoman to be their god. If a villager ever started to doubt that Magdalena was a deity, they would be named as unbelievers. As an unbeliever, they would need to be sacrificed ritualistically. The ritual Magdalena favored consists of brutal beatings, burnings, cutting, and maiming of the victims. Their blood was mixed with chicken blood and marijuana, and the god demanded the blood be consumed by the faithful using ceremonial goblets, after which everyone have to have sex with everyone else. She called the ritual El Ritual de la Sangre, meaning the ritual of blood. It wasn't long before Magdalena had many fanatical followers in the village. Now, over a 6-week period, it is estimated that 8 villagers were sacrificed in this manner. They only stopped when 14-year-old Sebastian Guerriero was walking in the woods one night and heard sounds coming from a cave. He made his way over and witnessed one of these sacrifices. He was so scared by what he saw, he ran 17 miles to the neighboring village to tell the police what he had seen. The scene described by Sebastian was so far-fetched that the police didn't believe him and laughed at his tales. Sebastian was obviously distraught, so to keep him happy, they sent one of the officers back to the scene. Neither of them was ever seen alive again. The police officer's disappearance and particularly prompted the police to create a type of task force made up of police officers and soldiers to go in and search for him. Well, on May 31st, 1963, the task force raided the site described by Sebastian. It was there that they found the murdered remains of Sebastian and the officer, who was Luis Martinez. Martinez's heart had been torn from his chest. The police found Magdalena and her brother stoned off their faces at a nearby home. They were arrested without a struggle. The same cannot be said for the Hernandez brothers, nor 12 of Magdalena's village followers. There was a classic shootout with the police, which resulted in one of the Hernandez brothers being killed. It was later found that the other brother had been killed by one of their supporters, a man who had realized the truth and decided he wanted his own cuts in the profits. While the 12 followers were sentenced to 30 years in prison, it depends on what source you read to find out how long Magdalena and her brother were sentenced for, but some sources say 30 years, some say 50 years. Either way, who knows how long her bloodthirsty reign would have lasted had that poor schoolboy not have walked past when he did.
Wow.
So she was, they were drinking the blood, and
The whole kind of sounds like the Mayan ritual thing, except for I don't think they drank the blood. They just held the beating heart up in the air and all that, you know.
More of what's her name? Elizabeth Bathory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now that was a weird woman.
Mm-hmm.
And she thought that bathing in human blood would make her look younger and all that kind of stuff.
Exactly. So she just went on a killing spree.
Yeah.
But this is in the 1930s, so I mean that's not that far away, you know, Magdalena.
Right. Okay. H.H. Holmes. This is an interesting one. Known by many as America's first documented serial killer, H.H. Holmes is responsible for the deaths of as many as 100 people, though he confessed to only 27 of those murders. Born in New Hampshire in 1860 under the name of Herman Webster Mudgett, Holmes is best known for the time he spent in Chicago during the World's Fair in 1893. After graduating from medical school in Michigan, Holmes moved to Chicago to practice pharmacy. Dispensing medicine, however, was not high on his priority list, and instead he became involved in a number of shady business deals, swindling people out of their money. In 1893, construction began on the castle, which would serve as his home office, a hotel for visitors to the fair, and ultimately his killing grounds. The building was 3 stories high, covered an entire city block, and had a floor plan that would confound even the most experienced architect. The 3rd floor was a sort of labyrinth with windowless rooms, doors opening to nowhere, stairs leading to nowhere. Sounds like the Winchester Mansion.
Yep.
And many more oddities. This was where Holmes committed his murders, torturing his victims and sending their bodies down secret passageways to the basement, where they were either burned or dissected and sold to medical schools. When the World's Fair concluded, Holmes left Chicago looking for more opportunities to increase his wealth and his victim count. When he was caught in an insurance fraud scheme with his associate Benjamin Petzel, who he had killed along with 3 of Petzel's children, Holmes was tracked and finally arrested in Boston. After his arrest, the castle was searched and authorities began uncovering evidence of some of the most gruesome crimes ever committed. After a trial lasting only 5 days, Holmes was convicted of murder and sentenced to the gallows on May 7, 1896. The story of H. Holmes is perhaps one of the most disturbing yet fascinating ventures into the mind of a killer.
I know. I can't wait till that movie comes out.
Oh, they got a movie coming out?
Yeah, with Leo DiCaprio.
Oh, really?
Yeah. We just posted on Facebook, and he's going to be H. Holmes, Leonardo.
Oh.
Yeah, it's going to be really good to watch that because he's considered one of the first American serial killers.
Rose, I'll never let go.
I know, right?
Okay.
And she let go.
Oh, hello, Paul.
Yep, Paul's in there.
Elizabeth Bathory, we were just talking about her.
Yep. Elizabeth Bathory. Now, let's see here. Kind of see. She was born into one of the oldest and wealthiest families in Transylvania. It has been said that around the age of 4 or 5, she had violent seizures. They may have been caused by epilepsy or another neurological disorder and may have something to do with her psychotic behavior later in life. In the 1600s, she is now 40 years old. She grew increasingly vain, and she feared that the thought of aging, as she may have lose her beauty. One day, a servant girl accidentally pulled her hair while combing it. Elizabeth slapped the girl's hand so hard she drew blood. The girl's blood fell into Elizabeth's hand, and she immediately thought that her skin took on a freshness of her young maid. She believed that she had found the secret of eternal youth. Elizabeth had her major domo and Thorco strip the maid and then cut her, drain her blood into a huge vat. Elizabeth bathed in it to beautify her entire body. So around 1600 to 1610, Elizabeth's henchmen continued to provide Elizabeth with new girls for the blood-draining ritual and her blood baths. Elizabeth went out of her way to see to it that the dead girls were given proper Christian burials by the local Protestant pastor, and at least intentionally. As the blood count rose, the pastor refused to perform his duties in this respect. Because there were too many girls coming to him from Elizabeth who had died of unknown and mysterious causes, she'd been threatened him in order to keep him from spreading the news of her new hobby and continued to have the bodies buried secretly. Now, near the end, many bodies were disposed of in haphazard and dangerously conspicuous locations. But one of her intended victims escaped and told authorities about what was happening at the castle Katish. King Madas of Hungary told Elizabeth's own cousin, Count Gregory Thurzo, governor of the province, to raid the castle. So on December 30th, 1610, they raided the castle, and they were horrified by the terrible sights. One dead girl in the main room, drained of blood, another alive whose body has been pierced with holes. In the dungeon, they discovered several living girls, one of whose body has been pierced several times. Below the castle, they exhumed the bodies of some 50 girls. Now, around 1611, a trial was held at Bitchy. Yeah, we have had, this is back in the 1600s, so you got all these big names that we can't pronounce. But Elizabeth, who refused to plead either guilty or innocent and never appeared in the trial. At the trial, Johannes Ujervery major domo, testified that about 37 unmarried girls had been killed, 6 of whom had personally recruited to the work at the castle. The trial revealed that most of the girls were tortured for weeks or even months. They were cut with scissors, pricked with pins, even prodded with burning irons onto short spikes in a cage hung from the ceiling to provide Bathory with a blood shower. Can you imagine that, being hung from the ceiling and it just pouring over you?
Being used as a shower?
Oh, that's what was going on. These women were tortured. Some
Dude,
what was that?
Dude Gaines just popped in.
Oh, who we got?
That is one of my friends that he's been here before, but Frank Delgadice.
Yes.
I still can't pronounce your name, dude.
Cabez. Elizabeth Bathory was one of the world's notorious serial killers. He is right. And she was thought as a vampire. She drank and bathed in her victim's blood. Yep, you are correct. So basically, sometimes the two witches tortured these girls, or the Countess did it herself. Elizabeth's old nurse testified that about 40 girls have been tortured and killed. In fact, Elizabeth killed 612 women in her diary. She documented their deaths. A complete transcript of the trial was made at the time, and its service today in Hungary. One of the people involved in these killings, all but Countess Bathory, and the 2 witches were beheaded and cremated. Due to her notability, Elizabeth was not allowed by law to be executed. The 2 accomplices had their fingers torn out and were burned alive. The court never convicted Countess Elizabeth of any crime. However, she was put under house arrest. She was sentenced to life imprisonment in her torture chamber, and stonemasons were brought to the wall up the windows and doors of the Countess inside. They left a small hole through which food could be passed. So King Modest, too, demanded the death penalty for Elizabeth, but because of her cousins, the prime minister, he agreed to indefinitely delay sentence, which really meant solitary confinement for life. So can you imagine killing 612 women and she wasn't allowed to be executed by law?
Right.
So, she was just confined for life. So in 1614, late in August of that year, one of the Countess jailers wanted to get a good look at her, since she was still reportedly one of the most beautiful women in Hungary. Peeking through the small aperture in the walled up cell that she was in, she was saw lying face down on the floor. Countess Elizabeth Bathory was dead. Her body was intended to be buried in the church in the town of Kacsis, but instead her body was placed in the northeastern Hungarian town of Eszed, the original Bathory family seat. So can you imagine? I mean,
This woman was it gives insanity a whole new meaning, I mean, she had to have been off her freaking rocker.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's putting it mildly. Psycho, deranged, weirdo.
But because of who she was, though, she wasn't allowed to be executed. I mean, I find that.
Well,
we're talking the 1600s,
That's just like, foreigners can come over here and commit murder and you can't do anything. They have to be expedited back to their home country to be, and I think that's bullcrap. You come over here and commit a crime, you should be punished over here, just like anybody else.
Oh, absolutely.
But that ain't how it works sometimes. They have what they call it, diplomatic immunity.
I mean, you know how much blood she bathed in?
Huh?
Yes, you know how much blood she bathed in? That's a lot of blood. Pouring from the ceilings, people punctured in holes, burned, poked, prodded.
I'm just thinking about somebody being cut open and used as a shower.
Yeah. Yeah, right from the ceiling.
I mean, that's taking it to a whole new level.
Absolutely.
Anyway, and I was thinking about this. Now, after she took her blood bath, they would have had to had another tub ready for her to get in to clean the blood off.
You would think so. It doesn't mention anything about that, does it?
I mean, she's not going to go around with blood on her all the time, right? Completely soaked in blood, blood red, so to speak. That wouldn't show much of her beauty.
No.
So
No, she'd have to bathe that off.
Where she could get out of this one, get in another one, wash the blood off or whatever, you know, and then go about her routine of setting up her next victim or whatever it is she did.
It's a lot of baths.
Proven that not all serial killers are actually crazy. To the contrary, they have large IQs. Yes, I agree. And I did put that in the comments about in the description. They are cunning psychos, but they are smart. Some of them are very, very smart, actually, which is how they managed to get away with it for so long. In fact, was it the Zodiac killer was leaving them clues because he wanted them to catch him and they were too stupid to figure it out. He wanted to get caught. He wasn't going to give himself up, but he wanted to get caught. So he would write them notes and everything, leaving them clues.
Yeah.
And he still managed to kill people for an unknown amount of time because they could not figure out the clues.
Yeah.
Anyway. Oh, Janice is here. Hello. Hey, Janice. NCPI is Janice.
Oh, okay.
John Wayne Gacy. By all accounts, John Wayne Gacy was an upstanding citizen and community leader. He was married with children, built his own contracting company, and did much volunteer work for organizations such as the JCs. He was known to volunteer for children's hospitals and parties as a clown. He was known not only to be friends and neighbors, but also to prominent community leaders and politicians. There you go. But there was a side of Gacy that few people ever saw, and those that did not live to tell about it.
Mm-hmm.
Gacy was one of the most notorious serial killers in American history. He drugged, raped, tortured, and killed over 30 men and young boys, many of whom were later found buried under his Chicago home. Gacy was one of the most, I just said that. There were telltale signs that all was not as it seemed with Gacy, even prior to the revelation that he was a serial killer. Rumors were rampant in town about Gacy's sexual preference for young boys. He was indicted in 1968 for the brutal sodomy of a teenager named Mark Miller. He later paid another teen to beat up Miller in an attempt to frighten him. Gacy pleaded guilty to the sodomy charges and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. He was only 26 years old.
Oh, wow.
He served only 18 months before being released for good behavior. Having been divorced by his first wife, he remarried in 1972 and reestablished his life and reputation. He hosted elaborate parties. How do you reestablish your reputation?
That's what I mean.
After you do some shit like that?
How could you go and be arrested and found guilty and then be let out and not have it happen again? I mean, especially around children. I mean, that's just insane.
And he rebuilt his reputation.
That's insane. I mean, this world is just, you know.
I'm saying. Anyway, he hosted elaborate parties and barbecues for neighbors, yet most reported that the incredible stench coming from Gacy's house was overwhelming. Little did they know that he had already begun burying his victims beneath the floorboards. As Gacy's construction business began to grow, he hired several teenage boys to work for him. Allegations of sexual assault by his employees were not uncommon, and eventually boys began to go missing. While investigating Gacy, officers found items belonging to one of the missing teens. Gacy admitted to the killing but claimed self-defense in 1978. As a pressure mounted and the investigation became more intense, Gacy finally admitted to killing more than 30 men and boys. He went on trial in 1980 and was finally executed in 1994.
Yeah, that is a recent one. I mean, I don't understand how people can just not think they're going to do it again when they come out good behavior.
You know, the thought just occurred to me, and I like clowns, but if you have somebody who was found guilty of sodomy, spent 18 months in prison, and then you smell weird smells coming from their house, like dead animals or dead something. I just couldn't picture having that clown at any of my kids' parties, or that would just be
knowing his past, right? How you would hire him after the fact.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
and you're talking about children. They're all buried under his house.
There are pics of Gacy's basement where they found the bodies, one that looked very paranormal. I'm sure it is.
Yeah, I've seen pictures.
I don't even know if the house is still there. I don't know. It seemed like I heard it wasn't, but could you imagine doing a paranormal investigation in that house?
I think that they have. I think they have.
Really?
I think the house was there. I remember seeing a video about it. Yes. Yes. The guy was a lunatic.
Hello there, 666. Anyway, yeah, that dude was, and see, that's the thing that's what I was saying at the beginning of the show. Paranormal investigation, you run across some scary, creepy stuff, but when you're talking about, these are actual people that committed these crimes, and they were living beings, and for whatever reason they did it for, boredom, sexual innuendos, whatever reason they did it for, that's some creepy stuff. And that's the fact about that is, I'm sure there's still serial killers out there today that we don't even know about yet.
Oh, absolutely. And there's a lot that's not even going to be mentioned in the show. There's just so many of them.
Anyway, Leonardo, how you pronounce that?
I'm gonna say Kanachului. It gotta be a ch in there, like Kanachului. She's called the soap maker, Leonardo. And this goes back to 1970. October 15th, 1970, she was convicted serial killer. Leonardo Kanachului died from a brain hemorrhage in a women's asylum for the criminally insane. She has spent the previous 2 decades incarcerated for the murder of 2 women, murders that she did not regret, murders she even felt were necessary for the survival of her children. What this lady did was she ended up killing people, and she made their fat and their body into soap. But she believed that there was a curse in her family, and the sacrifice of 3 women were needed to lift it. She was born in a small town of Mantella in 1894. She was an unhappy child who attempted suicide on one or more occasions. Her marriage was to be arranged, and she did not like the prospect of marrying someone she was certain not to be in love with. Well, in 1917, she went against her parents' wishes and married Raphael Pansardi, a registry clerk. The couple moved to Pansardi's hometown in 1921, and it was this time where Leonarda believed that her mother cursed her. She was very worried about this curse, and being a spiritual person, she sought out the advice and readings of a fortune teller and a palm reader. The fortune teller told her that her children would all suffer from many troubles, and although she would have many, all would perish early. The palm reader told her that she saw both a prison and an asylum somewhere in her future. Both of these readings turned out to be quite accurate. Now, she figured the only way to lift the curse her mother had placed on her was to perform human sacrifice. 3 murders were planned and were carried out as follows. Faustina Seti was her first victim. With everything in place and ready for departure, Seti was offered a parting drink of wine. However, she drank the wine, Seti fell unconscious, and Leonarda took her with an axe, killing her. She then set the dismembering the corpse over a basin in the closet, and these were her words. I threw the pieces in a pot, added 7 kilos of caustic soda, which I had bought to make soap, and stirred the whole mixture until the pieces dissolved in a thick, dark mush. Then I poured it into several buckets and emptied it in a nearby septic tank. As for the blood in the basin, I waited until it was coagulated, dried it in the oven, ground it, and mixed it with flour, sugar, chocolate, milk, and eggs, as well as a bit of margarine. Kneading all the ingredients together, I made a lot of crunchy tea cakes and served them to the ladies who came and visited through this person, and I also ate them. So she would make food out of it and then feed it to her friends. The second victim was Francesca Sovi, who was looking for work. The murder, soap making, and biscuit baking with the body took place. 4 weeks later, a third woman, Virginia Caprico, fell victim. This time, Leonarda added that Caprico made for a real creamy soap, and that the biscuits cooked from her remains were especially sweet, and everyone enjoyed them. So Leonardo's plot was finally undone several years later. When Leonardo's sister reported her missing and police arrived at Leonardo's house, it was the last place she had been seen. Leonardo did not even attempt to hide what she'd done and admitted everything to the police. During the trial, she spoke quite frankly about everything she had done and even corrected the prosecutors on details of her crime, going as far as to tell where some evidence has gone. She said, I gave the copper ladle, which I used to skim the fat off the kettles, to my country, which was so badly in need of metal during the last days of war. For the 3 murders, Leonardo Calicucci was sentenced to 30 years in prison and 3 years in an asylum for the criminally insane.
Wow.
So she was making soap, she was making biscuits, feeding it to her friends, and she thought that would lift the curse.
Yeah.
Can you imagine your neighbor just feeding you stuff that like they just like chopped up somebody in the other room, and they're like using their body fat and mixing it with all this stuff, and here you are eating it, thinking like, you know, it happens more than you think.
I'm sure it does, and that's just some. Oh my God! I had just eaten some biscuits. Oh, poor Paul. Hey, Roddy.
Yeah, Roddy's there.
Was it biscuits good, Paul? Just asking, buddy. I hope you didn't buy those biscuits already made. Ain't no telling what was in there.
Makes you think twice about homemade food, doesn't it?
Right. You know, you go, buy them from the store and make them homemade. That way I know what's in them. Jeffrey Dahmer. Now, he's always been a weird one. I've read about him. Jeffrey Dahmer was a Milwaukee. Oh, and by the way, before I start this one real quick, you guys are listening to the Paranormal Graveyard, watching, listening, etc., with Roger Belt and Christina Corsetti. And we are talking about serial killers. And this one is Jeffrey Dahmer. And he was a Milwaukee resident who targeted young boys and men in his hometown. His crimes included the rape, murder, dismemberment of his victims, as well as necrophilia and cannibalism.
Yeah.
He was convicted in 1991 of the murders of 17 young men. He was raised in a traditional household. His parents divorced when he was young, but his history does not contain any known abuse by his parents. Like many budding serial killers, young Jeffrey took an early interest in dead animals. Performing his own crude autopsies, he was a chronic alcoholic by the time he graduated from high school. By all accounts, he struggled with his sexuality and found himself attracted to young men. His crimes were, by his own accounts, an attempt to force his victims to remain with him forever. Jeffrey was sentenced to prison in the Columbia Correctional Institute, where he was beaten to death by a fellow inmate in 1994.
I remember that, actually.
Um,
Yeah, these people don't make it when they go to jail or prison.
exactly.
You know? They know what's going in there, and they make sure that something happens to them.
Hold on just a second. I have a, go ahead. We're talking about Ted Bundy.
Okay. Ted Bundy. One of the most recognizable serial killers was the charismatic, handsome Theodore Robert Bundy. Bundy once described himself as the meanest son of a bitch that ever lived. His crimes included rape, bludgeoning, strangulation, and murder of an undetermined number of women. Some speculate that he was responsible for as many as 100 women. He was also said to have engaged in necrophilia. Bundy grew up without a father and was subject to varying accounts of who his father actually was. He was raised by his grandparents and led to believe that his mother was actually his sister. By all accounts, imagine that, Bundy was intelligent and appeared to be socially well-adjusted. He held important positions in the Republican Party and developed a personal relationship with the Washington Governor Daniel J. Evans. His foray into the world of serial killing and his intense hatred of women may have been born out of his unusual dynamic with his mother and his rejection by a young woman who had fallen in love with him in college, thought he did engage in a significant long-term relationship with another woman following the demise of that pivotal experience. So Bundy was executed in the electric chair for the murders of 2 college co-eds in Chi Omega sorority house in Florida in 1989.
Man, these people, they're made into freaking celebrities, and they're sick people.
Yeah, but they're out there.
Exactly. That's my point. You don't know how many of them's out there right now, and we don't have a clue who they are.
Some of them still aren't even identified yet.
David
Berkowitz. He's the son of Sam. This is an older one. Yep, son of Sam.
Berkowitz is perhaps best known as the son of Sam, a notorious serial killer that terrorized New York City between 1976 and 1977. Though his reign of terror was short-lived, his name lives on in true crime legend. Berkowitz claimed that his crimes were instigated at the behest of the neighbor's dog, which had been possessed by demons that told him to kill. His crimes differ from those of Dahmer, Gain, and Bundy in that they did not appear to include any physical, psychosexual elements. Instead, Berkowitz shot his victims with a 44 caliber pistol. He was convicted of 6 murders to which he confessed. However, he later recanted and claimed credit for only 3 murders and the wounding of 4 others. He claimed that other murders attributed to him had been committed by members of a satanic cult of which he had been a member. He was placed for adoption as an infant with a loving family. However, his adoptive mother died of breast cancer when he was a teen, and his father remarried. David was not fond of his stepmother and stated that his stepsister practiced witchcraft, a hobby in which David himself later took an active interest. He was convicted in 1977 and sentenced to 365 years in prison.
Now, Son of Sam, if I remember correctly, he was the one that was going around to cars, right, and shooting them in the cars, right?
I think so. And
Yeah.
saying that the neighbor's dog told him to do it.
That's crazy.
Number 1, if the neighbor's dog talks to me, I'm going to run.
Are you sure? You want to talk to him? I'd talk
Yeah.
to him.
I don't want to talk to him. Because if he talks to me, tells me to kill somebody, I ain't going there.
A lot of people say that they were told to kill by certain things.
Right.
Here's our next Ed Gein. We all know the story of Ed Gein. He was another notorious serial killer from Wisconsin. By all accounts, he was a shy loner with an almost unnatural attachment to his mother. He remained in his family home all his life and was reportedly devastated by his mother's death in 1945. Ed had one brother who, by some accounts, may have had been Ed's first victim. Now, Ed exclusively killed women. Thereafter, it was thought that he had killed his brother as a result of his brother's lack of emotional attachment to their mother. Ed's parents remained married until his father's death in 1940, though they had notoriously unhappy marriage. As a result, his mother projected her anger and resentment onto her 2 sons, routinely abusing them and refusing to allow them to make friends with neighborhood children. Ed's mother also had an extreme attachment to her religion, using passages from the Bible to justify her cruel treatment of her sons. They were raised to believe that they were evil and unworthy. Now, the abusive upbringing is likely what shaped Ed's future deviant behaviors. He began killing women after his mother's death. He strung them up in his barn, dressed them out like a deer, and used their skin, hair, and bones to craft furniture. Like Dahmer, he was said to have cannibalized his victims. He was arrested in 1957 after the death of tavern owner Mary Hogan and spent the remainder of his life in the mental health medical health institute in Madison, Wisconsin. So that's where these movies come from. Like, we were doing the show on the horror movies.
Yeah.
Psycho, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, they all come from Ed Gein, and he really made some pretty sick stuff with the skin. What's that movie? It's on the tip of my tongue. The Lamb movie there with Bob. Silence of the Lambs. That was also part of Ed Gein.
Okay, this
Carl Denke? Is that what we're talking about?
Dude over here in the chat room, 666. I have a satanic cult. I really don't give a rat's ass, dude. Take your satanic cult and go somewhere else with it. Just saying. Okay. Now, I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this right. Carl Dink? Dinky?
Denke. Carl
Dink.
Denke. He was another one.
Of Zabais.
Yes. Wait till you hear this guy, Roger.
Carl Dinky was a devout Christian. He was much admired by all who knew him and had been nicknamed Papa Dinky. Danique. He was the man you went to if you were in trouble. He assisted at evangelist funerals by carrying the cross, and he played the organ at church. He was most well known for the assistance he gave beggars, vagrants, and weary travelers. And he was also a ritualistic cannibal who killed at least 40 people, pickled their flesh, and sold it as pork at the Rocklaw markets.
Yeah, he was another one.
Oh, this dude is out there. It was after his death that his entire double life emerged. Danique was a complete psychopath. The police had no idea what they were walking into when they entered his property to secure it for his relatives. What they found instead was a meat processing shop, which was scientifically confirmed to be full of human remains. The first findings made in Danique's house during the search were bones and pieces of meat. The latter were in a salt solution found in a wooden drum. There were altogether 15 pieces with skin, 2 parts of the breast, which is strongly hairy. The remaining pieces belong to the side and back parts. The largest is about 40 by 20 centimeters large. Particularly striking was a very clean anus with large parts of both buttocks.
Crazy.
Now, how much weirder than that can you get?
Wait till you see what they found him with. Talk about cannibalism.
That's okay. In 3 medium-sized pots filled with cream sauce, some cooked meat partially covered with skin and human hair was found. The meat was pink and soft. All pieces seemed cut from the guttural area, buttocks. One pot had only half a portion. Danique must have eaten the other piece short before being arrested. Being arrested, I thought they said he died and they were securing the house. In the third pot were found numerous pieces of human skin and parts of the aorta in a gelatinous mass. A bowl on the table in his room was filled with amber-colored fat that appeared to be human. Biological tests gave a weak positive result for the presence of human protein. In the shed in which the meat pieces were found was also a barrel full of bones that were clean of tendons, muscles, etc., that most probably have been priorly cooked. The investigation initially revealed the existence of 6 forearm bones, which means that they belong to 3 people at least. Another traces were found behind the shed. A part of a leg remained in the pond that Danique had dug many years before, and also skeletal pieces were uncovered in the local forest. Here is the full list of what has been sent to us for examination. 16 femurs, of which 1 pair of remarkably strong ones, 2 pairs of very thin ones, 6 pairs of 2 left femurs, 15 medium-sized pieces of long bones, 4 pairs of elbow bones, 7 heads of radii, 9 lower parts of radii, 8 lower parts of the elbow, a pair of upper shin bone, a pair of lower elbows and radii, of which extremities still remain well connected, a pair of upper arms and a pair of upper arm heads, a pair of collarbones, 2 shoulder blades, 8 heels and ankle bones, 120 toes, wow,
Isn't that crazy?
and phalanx, 65 feet in metacarpal bones, 5 first ribs, and 150 pieces of ribs. Considerably more revealing was Denise's dental collection, which we received a total of 351 teeth.
Yep.
The remains of Carl's victims were turning up still in the late 1940s, with investigators eventually concluding that at least 40 people were murdered by this madman.
Yeah, Carl Denke. He was definitely a cannibal.
Now, that makes you want to go to church? Just saying. You know, here's this
Makes you want to
guy
go to church.
who's outstanding member of his church, helps the needy and the, you know, all that. I see where he was helping those needy.
Crazy. I mean, that's a lot of stuff being found. And that was worse than Ed Gein. You know? Okay.
Now, see, and this is the thing about these people. You know, you have one that dresses like a clown. You have one that wears people's skin, which is where they got the Joe Dirt trench coat line in the movie.
Yep. Yep.
And you have this guy who, for whatever reason, is killing these people, and it didn't necessarily say why he was doing it. You know what his thing was, but apparently he was a cannibal. A big time cannibal who was like a deacon in a church, or I don't know if it was a deacon or whatever, but higher up in the church, I guess. You know, the go-to guys, they said.
Yep.
You know, and then you have the woman that bathes in the people's blood. I mean, you put all this together, man, and it makes you not even want to go out on the street. You know, you could walk out on your front porch and bam, wind up in a crock pot, you know?
Yep.
Yeah.
I just posted about a case that a woman cooked his wife. Cut her up, put her in a pot, and cooked her for 4 days.
Yeah.
Just because she pissed him off. You know? It's unbelievable. But you could go down, you can go outside, and the person next to you could be a serial killer. You never even know it. You wouldn't even know it.
Walk past somebody on the sidewalk and they may have butchered somebody, you know, an hour before. Anyway.
All right, let's see. Well,
Mary Strickland said most serial killers are respected community members. That's true. You know, a lot of them are like politically connected, or, you know, high up in the church, or, you know, big business owners, or, you know, people you would never expect or suspect, should I say.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Albert Fish.
Yes, he's another one. The only thing with Albert Fish that I don't like is his game was mostly children, and that's sad, you know. But
Right.
Albert Fish is known for being one of the most vile pedophiles and killers of all time. After his capture, he admitted to molesting over 400 children and to have been tortured and killed several others. Fish was a small, gentle-looking man who appeared kind and trusting, yet once alone with his victims, the monster inside of him would unleash. A monster so perverse and cruel that his crimes seemed unbelievable. He was eventually executed, and according to rumors, he turned his own execution into a fantasy of pleasure. Now, Fish would often lure children away from their homes and torture them in various ways, including the use of a paddle laced with sharp nails before raping them. I mean, that's just sick. I mean, anyone that does this deserves to be.
Exactly.
You know, this is where you know, the death penalty comes in. You know, even the guillotine. You know, cut their head off. I mean.
Right.
As time went on, the sexual fantasies he would act out on children grew more fiendish and bizarre, and often ended up in murdering and cannibalizing his young victims. In 1898, he married and later fathered 6 children. The children led average lives up until 1917, after Fish's wife ran off with another man. It was at that time the children recall Fish occasionally asking them to participate in his sadomasochistic games. One game included the nail-filed paddle Fish used on his victims. He would ask the children to paddle him with the weapon until blood ran down his leg. He would also find enjoyment from pushing needles deep into his skin. Later, Fish was caught and arrested. He immediately began confessing to killing several hundred of children, Fish smiling as he described the grisly details of the tortures and murders appeared to the detectives as the devil himself. On March 11th, 1935, Fish's trial began, and he pled innocent by reason of his insanity. He blamed voices in his head for instructing him to kill these children and perpetrate the many other horrendous crimes during his statistic career. Despite the numerous psychiatrists who described Fish as insane, the jury found him sane and guilty. After a short 10-day trial, he was sentenced to die by electrocution. So on January 16, 1936, Albert Fish was electrocuted at Sing Prison, reportedly a process Fish looked upon as the ultimate sexual thrill, but later dismissed as just rumor.
Wow.
Yeah, he was one sick puppy.
No shit, you know, and some of the people you would not ever think would have the strength and stamina to pull some of the crap that they did.
Yes.
You know, like little petite people.
Yes.
Don't let the size fool you, people. Dynamite comes in small packages. Just saying. John
Emil.
Yeah. Pardon me. Emil. John Emil.
Yep.
Emil, yes. Okay. November 9th, 1971, John Emil List murders his wife and mother in his Westfield, New Jersey home. Hey, dude, we got somebody over close to you. The List's 3 children were at home during these horrifying events. As the children came home from school, he too shot them. Finally, watching his elder son play soccer before driving him home and shooting him. Now that's sick.
Especially his own family. You know what I mean? It's his own family.
Right. Yeah, but how are you going to go watch your son play soccer and then take him home and shoot him?
You're just sick in the head.
You know, the bodies were placed on sleeping bags and arranged in the home's ballroom in some sick semblance of a slumber party. He turned on the lights, cleaned all of the rooms, switched to a religious station on the radio, and left. The dead family was not found for nearly a month, but soon after, because one of New Jersey's most notorious crimes and investigations, although hundreds of leads were followed, the trail was cold, although List's car was found at the Kennedy Airport. He had never boarded a plane. His whereabouts were a complete mystery. Due to the horrific murders and his disappearance, List was commonly referred to as the boogeyman of Westfield. A break in the case came nearly 18 years later when America's Most Wanted ran a story on the murders. The story included a clay bust of John List as he may look at the time, with age progression features. Okay. A man in Richmond, Virginia recognized the features of the clay bust as being identical to his neighbor. List was arrested 2 weeks later. He was using the name Robert Peter Clark and had since remarried. Good Lord, not again. List claimed his innocence for months until the evidence piled up and he eventually admitted his guilt. He was charged and convicted of 5 counts of first-degree murder and was handed 5 consecutive life sentences. List died on March 21st, 2008 at age 82 from complications arising from pneumonia. He was buried next to his mother in St. Lawrence Lutheran Cemetery, Frankenmuth, Michigan.
Next to his mother, who he shot, by the way.
Yeah, now
I mean, that's not right.
I was fixing to
I
say,
wouldn't want him next to me.
I'd have buried him in a daggum pothole, put
I
ashes
know.
on him or something. You know, I mean, how do you bury somebody next to a mother that they killed along with their wife and children and anybody else that they killed?
Exactly.
Like they were some saint or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Ugh.
It's this world, I'm telling you. And that's a recent one too. I mean, he just, you know what I mean, died at 82 at 2008. He was convicted, five life sentences.
Yeah.
And then he dies from pneumonia, you know? I mean, unbelievable.
You know, I'm one of these people who believe in let the punishment fit the crime.
Absolutely. It should fit the crime.
And there was a term of Indian torture, and I think it was let me see, what tribe was that? Anyway, they would hang people up and they would strip their skin off while they were alive.
Flaying.
Peel their skin off.
Yeah, that's flaying.
And that's what I say. String them up, peel them.
Yeah, torture them. Torture them like they tortured others.
That's what it feels like to suffer.
You know what I mean? I mean, sitting in jail, you know, a lot of people think I'd rather have them sit in jail than just be killed, because being killed is an easy way out. They're going to be killed for their crimes, you know? But I do believe that they should be tortured for the torture that they created for other people.
Frank, I so agree. Strange world we live in, but you know, and I think the more sick and violent, you know, the people are and the atrocities they committed, the worse torture they ought to have to suffer.
Yeah, I believe that too. You know,
people may think, oh, well, you shouldn't think like that, but no, I think, let the punishment fit the crime.
Hey, they did it back in the 1800s. I mean, what's that show we did with all the medieval torches, right? I mean, a little different, but I mean, they should bring some of that back. You know, they could do it back then with 76 torches. I mean, hey, you know.
You don't even want to know what I think should be done to pedophiles. But
absolutely.
I won't even go into that one.
Yeah, that's just wrong. But this next guy, he is Russian. So we're gonna chop up his name here, but it's Andrei Romanovich Chikatilo. He's called the Rostov Ripper. Now, we're gonna call him the Rostov Ripper because I'm not gonna keep pronouncing his name wrong. But he was a Russian serial killer responsible for over 4 dozen murders. He was social awkwardness and self-hatred became worse during his adolescent years when he turned out to suffer from chronic impotence. Okay, so over the following 12 years, the Rostov Ripper committed over 50 known murders. Because reports of crimes like serial murder and rape were greatly suppressed by Soviet authorities, in the state-controlled media, stories began taking a life of their own. Among the rumors that circulated was that victims were killed and mutilated by a werewolf. In September of 1984, he was arrested after soliciting a prostitute having been approaching a number of women as the Rostov bus station. His briefcase was searched and found to contain a kitchen knife, a towel, a rope, and a jar of petroleum jelly. Unfortunately, his blood type did not come back to match the semen found on the bodies, forcing the investigators to release him. This has never been fully explained and is sometimes believed to have been the result of a clerical error. Other sources claim that it was because he was a non-secretor, which meant his blood type wouldn't be determined from his semen. Weeks after his arrest, he was expelled from the Communist Party after being convicted of stealing from his workplace and sentenced to 3 months in jail. Well, in November 1990, the Rostov Ripper was stopped and questioned when coming out of the area with his final victim. Her name was Svetlana Korostek, was found. November 14th, the day after the remains were discovered, he was formally arrested and interrogated. Over the following 2 weeks, he confessed to a total of 56 murders, of which the investigators had only attributed 36 of them to him. The case went to trial on April 14, 1992, and he was placed inside an iron cage, went on the stand to protect him from the family members of his victims. Can you imagine that, in court in an iron cage, just to protect people around you?
From the people's family of people you killed.
Yeah. He was put in an iron cage in the courtroom. His behavior during the proceedings was bizarre, to say the least. Twice, he pulled down his pants, exposed himself, and shouted that he was not a homosexual. He claimed to be pregnant and lactating at some point and alternated between boredom and anger. He also denied being guilty of several murders to which he had already confessed while confessing to unknown ones. When the prosecutor was about to deliver the final argument, the Rostov Ripper broke into song and had to be removed from the courtroom. When he was brought in and offered a moment to speak, he said nothing. Though the defense tried to claim as he was insane, a group of court-appointed psychiatrists agreed. On October 14, 1992, he was found guilty of 52 murders, 21 males, 31 females. On February 14, 1994, he was executed with a single shot to the head, with his last words apparently being, "Don't blow my brains out. The Japanese want to buy them. Don't blow my brains out. The Japanese want to buy them." I mean, what a sicko. What I did was it was not for sexual pleasure. Rather, it brought me some peace of mind. His victims, most of which were females or runaways, varied in age. He would usually approach them at the train or bus station using some simple ruse, promising them money, drugs, or alcohol, luring them into a nearby forest, and then killing them by stabbing them in order to gain sexual release because he was impotent. He often mutilated them, such as gouging their eyes out because he believed they contained a snapshot of the last thing they saw, cutting out their tongues and genitals. When he tortured his male victims, he often fantasized that they were his prisoners and that his actions made him a hero. On one occasion, he actually bit a nipple off a young woman's victim and swallowed it, causing him to ejaculate. Sometimes he stuffed his victims' mouths to muffle their screams. I mean, what a sicko. And I seen a picture of this guy. This guy is pretty bad.
Is he like way out there?
He's way out there. I mean, his teeth are like they're like pointy and stuff. I mean, he's just a sick person.
Frank said, "What bothers me are the load that said they did it because they were bored." How do you do something like that because you're bored? And I remember reading a case about two young guys that took a girl out somewhere in the middle of nowhere to an old empty house and killed her just because they wanted to see what it felt like to kill somebody.
It's crazy.
I mean, the reasons people do shit. Ugh. Alfred, Packer, the Colorado cannibal. On February 9th, 1874, Alfred Packer and 5 other men departed from the camp of Ute Chief Ouray near what is now Montrose, Colorado. They were resuming a trek that had begun several months earlier in Provo, Utah, hoping to reach newly discovered gold prospects in Breckenridge, Colorado. While the original party was considered larger, Packer, Israel, Swan, Shannon, Wilson, Bell, George Noon, James Humphrey, and Frank Miller dared risk the sometimes brutal Colorado winter in search of riches. Brutal as it was, as not long after leaving the safety of Chief Ouray's camp, the group was engulfed in a furious blizzard near the present site of Lake City, Colorado. Packer was next seen on April 16, 1874, straggling into the Los Pinos Indian Agency with little more than a rifle and a skinning knife belonging to members of his party. The story Packer told at that time was that once the storm hit, he had set up camp while the others went forward in search of food. They never returned, and Packer subsequently headed out for Los Pinos. After recovering, Packer left for Saguenay, Colorado, where by some accounts he suddenly became a big spender at the local saloon. Unfortunately for Packer, in Saguenay, he encountered several men from the original Provo group who were dubious about his version of the story. Indian agent Charles Adams took Packer back to Los Pinos for questioning about the matter, and on May 8, 1874, extracted the first of Packer's 2 conflicting confessions. According to Packer, Israel Swan had died, and the others, being without food, had eaten him. Subsequently, 3 others had died from exposure and starvation. Then Packer admitted to killing Shannon Bell, claiming it was in self-defense. Packer was transported back to Saguenay and jailed outside the town, not in the town's jailhouse, as some have told. In August, Packer escaped from custody and wasn't seen again until March 1883. The jury wasted no time in finding Packer guilty of murder, and Judge Melville B. Jerry pronounced that Packer be hanged by the neck until you are dead. Packer appealed his conviction to the Colorado Supreme Court, where the verdict was reversed. He was tried again and this time found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 40 years in the state penitentiary. After serving only 17 years of his sentence, Packer, because was championed by a grassroots campaign in Denver, in 1901, Governor Charles S. Thomas granted Packer's parole request. Packer moved to Littleton, Colorado, where by all accounts he became a model citizen, well liked by all his neighbors. He died of natural causes on April 23, 1907, and was buried with military funeral in Littleton Cemetery.
Now, you're talking about a guy, right, that, killing, eating people. Colorado, if you go there, they actually think this guy is a hero. They have places named after him, a statue made of him. They have a burger named after him. I mean, they treat him like a hero.
Back up a burger?
Yeah, they have a burger named after him. And the local, I'd have to look it up. I'd have to look it up, but I was just reading about it. And they think this guy's a hero. Yeah, like a cheeseburger named after him. They consider this guy a hero. And it's really weird. They have a museum after him with all his stuff in it.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I don't even want to think about it because, you know, somebody that sick, you know, the Donner Pass incident. Sometimes I believe you would have a choice on whether or not to become cannibalistic to survive. Okay.
Yeah.
And let's just say that you know the human flesh that you were eating was from people that had already died, you know, and in order to survive and even to get word out to somebody what had happened, you would have to stoop to that.
That's a little different.
Or die.
Yeah.
But
not going out killing them.
But when you deliberately kill a living being because you think, you know, that if you don't do this, you're going to die, you need to die.
Yeah.
You know, just saying.
They even have a trail that you could follow where he did this, you know, and they have it as a tour guide, I mean, it's just unbelievable.
I haven't seen anything from Paul in a while. I don't know if Paul's still here or not. Anyway, Jonestown.
Yes, Jonestown. We all know the story of Jonestown. On November 18th, 1978, nearly 1,000 Americans died in incidents related to the People's Temple led by Jim Jones in Jonestown, about a third of which were children included in this revolutionary suicide, as they called it. They died of cyanide poisoning and gunshot wounds. The event occurred, which shocked the world. It was November 18th, 1978. The bodies of 912 people were found. These included men, women, children, and a community-style settlement in the middle of Guyana in South America. What is it? Guyana? Jim Jones founded the People's Temple in 1956. This was racially interrogated church with a heavy communist view. Now, he was not a fan of the U.S. government. He did not like the democratic society, which would allow his followers the freedom to do as they wished, instead of how he desired. His dream was to create a settlement in land where the U.S. government had no say, where he would not be censored and made to follow other rules. Before long, he entered into a lease agreement with the Guyanese government for over 3,000 acres of land in a remote area in the middle of the jungle. He sent 50 of his people over to Guyana. Is that how you pronounce it?
Guyana.
Guyana, to ready the land. They began clearing the trees, scrubbing bushes, and building dormitories. Construction was slow as materials needed to be shipped and transported in. Now, every worst case scenario you could imagine, he told his followers, and they trusted him, believed him. They said the only way to prevent the painful death the U.S. government had planned for them was to take their own lives. And what he termed the Revolutionary Act, a tape of the temple's final meeting was recorded. It contains repeated discussions of the group committing revolutionary suicide, including reference to people taking poison and to vats to be used. Nearly 1,000 lifeless bodies discovered as they lay there dead. Now, they set to work quickly, large tubs filled with grape-flavored drink laced with cyanide and Valium. Parents with their children lined up to drink this Caucasian, with the youngest kids having the poison squirted into their mouths through syringe. Mothers watched their babies die, and they then ingested the poison themselves. Many did try to flee when it came time to drink the poison, but they were shot by the armed guards who were always present. Not all were killed, though. It was estimated that there were over 1,100 people in the compound at the time of the mass suicide, with 912 dying from poison or gunshot wounds. The rest fled into the jungles. Now, Jim Jones died from a single gunshot wound to the head. It was not clear if he shot himself or if someone else took the shot for him.
this guy, he was a work of art. Before all this started, when he was the pastor of a church, he had, what do you call them, parishioners, the flock, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Elderly women would sign their Social Security over to him.
Really?
Sell their homes and give him the money. You know, this man, he knew how to finagle people. You know, make believers out of them, I guess. And you look at a lot of these preachers nowadays who have like these humongous churches, and they do the online services where you see the big, huge, buildings.
Mm-hmm.
Where there's like thousands of people there. You have to worry about people like that because their influence is just unreal. The simple fact that look at that one guy, I can't think of his name off the top of my head, lives in a freaking mansion, spread out over a big area and everything, and he's just a preacher. That's what he does.
Yeah.
So you have to wonder about people like, you have to be really leery about that. And that's another one of the reasons why I was raised Christian, but I don't hold too much with the belief anymore because it's became a big line of BS. And they're not trying to save your soul, they're trying to empty your pocket.
Yeah.
So having said that, we shall carry on. Jane Toppin, born Nora Kelly in Boston during 1854, Toppin lost her mother in infancy. Her father, a tailor, was confined to an asylum after he found his shop trying to stitch his own eyelids together.
Unbelievable.
His 4 daughters lived briefly with their parental grandmother before they were relegated to a local orphanage. Abner Toppin and his wife from Lowell, Massachusetts, legally adopted Nora during 1859, changing her first name to Jane. After that, she twice attempted suicide and suffered through a period of odd behavior that included efforts to predict the future through analysis of dreams. Briefly stabilizing during 1880, Jane signed on as a student nurse at a hospital in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Once again, she excelled in her classwork, but supervisors and colleagues were disturbed by her obsession with autopsies. Dismissed after 2 patients died mysteriously in her care, she left the hospital without her certificate, forging the paperwork necessary to find work as a private nurse. Over the next 2 decades, she was hired by dozens of New England families caring for the ill and elderly in several states, but few of Toppin's patients managed to survive her special treatment. On July 4th, 1901, an old friend, Mattie Davis, died under Jane's care at Cambridge, and Toppin accompanied the body home to Catamount, Massachusetts for burial. Retained as the family nurse by Patriarch Alden Davis, Jane finished off his married daughter, Annie Gordon, on July 29th. The old man's death a few days later was blamed on a stroke, and his surviving daughter, Mary Gibbs, was pronounced dead on August 19th. Mary's husband demanded an autopsy, and lethal doses of morphine were found in the three latest victims. But Jane was not finished yet. Before her arrest in Amherst, New Hampshire on October 29th, she fed a lethal tonic to her foster sister, Edna Bannister, and she was working on another patient when police cut short her medical career. In custody, Toppin confessed to 31 murders, naming her victims, but students believe her final tally falls somewhere between 70 and 100 victims. No accurate list of her hospital victims was ever compiled, and various New England families avoided the scandal by refusing official requests for exhumations and autopsies. At trial, Jane's lawyer grudgingly conceded 11 murders, staking his hopes on a plea of insanity. Toppin cinched the case with her own testimony, telling the court that is my ambition to have killed more people, more helpless people, than any man or woman who has ever lived. Now, how sick is that?
Right.
Declared insane, Toppin was confined for life to the state asylum at Taunton, Massachusetts, where she died in August 1938 at the age of 84. She was remembered by her keepers as a quiet old lady, but older attendants remembered her smile as she beckoned them into her room. "Get some morphine, dearie," she would say, "and we'll go out in the ward. You and I will have a lot of fun seeing them die."
Oh, you get some morphine.
You know, and this is an old woman talking.
Yep.
You know, I mean, at what point do you get over this shit?
Yeah. No. If it starts off in the beginning, you're like that the whole life. I mean, it's just in you. I would think so. You know.
Crazy people.
Yep.
You are watching and listening to the Paranormal Graveyard with Roger Belt and Christina Corzetti, and we are talking about serial killers. Hope y'all have enjoyed this so far. Man, there's some really sick, crazy people out there. And we're going to get into Lydia Sherman.
Lydia Sherman. Well, she was born in Burlington in 1824. Lydia Sherman was orphaned at the age of 9 and raised by an uncle. She left town in 1840 and moved to New Brunswick, New Jersey. She met her first husband, Edward Struck, a widower with 6 children. They moved to Manhattan, where Struck joined the police force and had 7 more children together. So that's 13 children. After 18 years of marriage, Struck was discharged and became depressed. Lydia poisoned him with arsenic to put him out of basically his misery. Finding herself unable to single-handedly support at least half a dozen young children, she poisoned baby William, 4 years old, Edward, and 6-year-old Martha Ann in a single day. When 14-year-old George became chronically ill, she laced his tea with arsenic. When 12-year-old Ann Eliza had recurrent chills and fevers one winter, Lydia poisoned her as well. Lydia's oldest daughter, 18 years old, Lydia died of natural causes 2 months after the last of her siblings were poisoned. Hired by a storekeeper to care for his invalid mother in Stratford, Connecticut, Lydia was recommended as a housekeeper to a wealthy farmer, Dennis Hurlburt. He hired her, married her within days, and was dead of poisoning within months, leaving her $10,000. Finally, widower Horatio Sherman came calling, wanting to hire Lydia as a housekeeper and nurse for his baby. When he upped to ante to marriage, she accepted, but after that they were married. Horatio drank heavily, abused her, and wasted her ill-found inheritance. In an effort to gain his attention and affection, Lydia poisoned baby Frankie, then 16 years old, Ada. When Horatio remained unchanged, she put arsenic in his brandy bottle. Having poisoned 3 husbands and 7 children, Lydia Sherman went on trial in 1872 and was convicted of second-degree murder. Dubbed the modern Lucretia Borgia, poisoned fiend, Borgia of Connecticut, and the Queen Poisoner, she spent the rest of her life in prison. How many people would want to marry this woman? I mean, you hire them as a nanny, and then you like marry her and have kids. You know what I mean? I mean, give me a break.
You're not going to take the time to get to know this person before you marry him?
And I'm still single. What's up with that?
You know,
that's crazy.
And when you hear stuff like this, it just makes you think, well, if I ever consider marriage, I'm running a serious background check on this asshole.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, Jesus.
I'm going to make sure I know what I'm getting.
This is crazy.
Oh, man. Crazy stuff.
How could you do that?
Usually wants attention, munching, what? Okay. William Burke and William Hare. Burke and Hare. I know y'all have heard of Burke and Hare, right?
Yep.
Okay. For those of you who have not, you're about to hear about Burke and Hare. Back in 1828, medical science was under rapid advancement. Great discoveries were being made, but unfortunately, there were not enough dead bodies or cadavers, as they were called, for the scientists/doctors to experiment on. Enter William Burke and William Hare, two Irish immigrants living in Scotland who quickly became entrepreneurs of the deadly kind. Within a 10-month period, these two men killed at least 16 people and sold their bodies to medical science. At the time, the main legal supply of corpses for anatomical purposes in the UK were of those condemned to death and dissection by the courts. Although executions were rather plentiful in those days, they still were not frequent enough to keep up with the demand of modern science and anatomy studies. Body snatching became prominent, and often that would also fail because after a while graveyards took security measures to ensure the fresh graves were not dug up. This seemed like such a simple way to earn a good deal of money that evil plans began to hatch in their heads. Before long, they had chosen a victim, Joseph, a tenant at the boarding house who was very ill. They spent some time with him, got him roaring drunk on whiskey, and then suffocated him. The next victim was a woman, Abigail Simpson, was an older lady from the village of Gilmerton. They invited her in off the street to spend the night and then also intoxicated her with alcohol before smothering her. Her body was placed in a tea chest, and a clandestine meeting was arranged with a porter to exchange the body. 2 more murders were committed within relatively quick succession. Hare's wife orchestrated one murder, ensuring the victim was intoxicated and stayed that way until her husband arrived home to finish the job. The next was murdered by Burke acting on his own. Burke then met 2 women at a part of Edinburgh known as Congate, Mary Patterson and Janet Brown. It is probably these 2 ladies were prostitutes. Brown was uncomfortable when an argument broke out between Burke and his mistress, so she left. Patterson stayed and unfortunately met her demise. Elfie, a scavenger who sold scraps of leather, was the next victim. And the one after that was a drunk woman who was so close to being arrested, only to have Burke save her by saying they knew her and could return her to her lodging. Instead, he delivered her body to the medical school. How about that?
I know, right?
An old lady and her mute son were the next unfortunates. These deaths differed in that they overdosed the old lady on painkillers, but the boy got stretched over Hare's knee until his back broke. What a horrible way to die. Hare later said that the way he killed that boy disturbed him the most out of all the deaths he committed. If it disturbed you so much, what'd you do it for, you idiot? Next were a Mrs. Hostler and Ann Dougal. A cousin of Burke's mistress, Mary Haldane, a former lodger who had asked to sleep in their stable, was the next victim, and then Mary's daughter Peggy a few days later when she came around to ask if they had seen her mother. James Wilson, known as Deaf Jamie, was the next victim. He was a mentally disturbed youth of about 18 years when he was murdered. The mistake they made with this victim was that he was a familiar figure on the streets. So when he went missing, it was noticed and his body was recognized when Dr. Knox uncovered it. The doctor denied that it was Jamie and quickly dissected him to make him no longer recognizable. The last victim was Mary Doherty, who was invited into the lodging house and given supper and some drinks, but whose death was delayed due to the presence of other lodgers. The graves there at the time, neighbors reported later in the evening that they heard the sounds of a struggle and a woman's voice crying out murder. Their killing spree was up. The next day, the graves returned suspicious at the behavior of Burke, who would not let them approach a bed where Mrs. Gray had left a stocking. She checked it later in the evening when they were alone in the residence and found the body of Mary Doherty under it. They immediately went to the police to report the murder, and that is how Burke and Hare, together with Burke's mistress and Hare's wife, were arrested. Burke and his mistress, McDougal, faced 3 charges of murder. Their trial lasted 24 hours and found Burke guilty, but McDougal not proven so. At 8:15 a.m. on 28 January 1829, Burke was hanged in front of an enormous crowd. In a show of irony, the next day his body was publicly dissected.
Yep.
So what happened to Hare? He was given the chance for immunity. If he served as a witness against his best friend, naturally he did it and spent the rest of his life fleeing angry mobs whenever he was recognized in towns all throughout the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
You're going to give a murderer immunity to turn evidence against your friend who is your partner in the murders.
Isn't that wild? Why do I have an echo?
That's some freaky stuff right there. I don't care who you are. How do you do that? You know, the Hart brothers.
Yeah, and I believe this is the last one we have for the show tonight, which we made just in time. Roger,
Yep,
did my job. Did pretty good tonight. The Hart brothers. All right. One story claims they were brothers born on the dawn of the American Revolution. Another, they were cousins immigrated from Scotland years previous. Some claim they killed out of disgust for their fellow man. Others, that they are driven to revenge the murder of their father. The story of the Hart brothers and many and conflicted, and yet all agree that 2 men, Micaiah Big Harp and Wiley Little Harp, waged a bloody rampage of murder.
Big Harp and Little Harp.
Yep, Big Harp and Little Harp. Yep. That he waged a bloody rampage of murder against the people of the newly founded United States of America, a land that came to known to them as its first serial killers. Born sometime in 1770, now we're going way back, Micaiah and Wiley Harp grew up in Orange County, North Carolina. Raised as Tories or individuals loyal to the Crown of England, they were forced to flee west when the war ended in 1783, and the constant threat of political persecution began knocking at their door. They joined the Chickamauga Indian raids on American settlements and discovered their appetite for violence. Eventually, they were joined by Susan Wood and Maria Davidson, either as prisoners of war or as willing wives, and the group ventured further west, a trial of bodies always following. Now, that trial continued until the fateful day they reached Knoxville, Tennessee. It was here they committed one of their few acts recorded by the pen of history. June 1st, 1797, Wiley married Sarah Rice. The group settled down and the murders stopped. Everything remained peaceful until the day of 1798 when the brothers redeclared their war on the living men and women. They set the town aflame, gutted those in their path, and set out on a 9-month killing spree, forged forever in the fires of this nation. It isn't clear what caused the spark. Some historians believe the brothers were caught stealing livestock from their neighbors. Others wondered if the dullness of normal life was too much for them to bear. Whatever the case, no one was safe. From the wilderness of Tennessee to the mountains of Kentucky and the caves of Illinois, the bodies of over 40 men and women and children were found torn up and weighed down with stones. Finally, in July of 1799, the brothers' storm came to an end. After the murder of his wife, Moses Stegall formed a posse of neighboring villagers and captured Micaiah Harp?
Yeah.
Micaiah, okay, wounded and beaten. Big confessed, which is Big Harp they're talking about, to 18 murders, but claimed remorse for only one, the murder of an infant. Mr. Stegall shot Micaiah, which is, I want to say, through the heart, and placed his head upon a spike as a warning to any and all outlaws that should come across it, a place now known as Harp's Head. Wiley, Little Harp, fled and took the alias of John Seddon. He was arrested in 1803 when he attempted to attain the bounty for the outlaw Samuel Mason. While the townspeople didn't recognize Mason's severed head, they also recognized Wiley's true identity. Wiley was tried and hanged for his crimes in 1804. The Harp women were arrested and released without charge. No one knows for certain what part they played in the murders. While they claim innocence, witnesses said the women took as much pleasure in the murders as the Harp brothers did themselves. Whatever the case, Sally returned to her father's home in Knoxville and later remarried. Betsy also found a new husband, while Susan lived out her days in Russville in peace. So the women got away with it, and the Harp brothers ended up dying for their crimes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I bet if this happened a couple of times and was publicized, it would make these think twice. Yeah, I agree. Mad cow. That's the last story that we have for tonight, everybody. Hope y'all enjoyed the show. And it gives you food for thought. And I don't mean that in a cannibalistic term, but however you want to look at it. Some of them did commit cannibalism along with their killing sprees. And some didn't. They just like to kill. And then, like, we were talking about the Burke and Hare, which I'd read about them before. That's not a prosperous thing anymore, so that's why it doesn't happen nowadays. But
you mean to give to medical schools? Yeah, well, they used to pick people up and give to medical schools.
Back then, it was a very profitable arrangement between doctors and people like them. And Burke and Hare were not the only ones by a long shot that were doing this thing, but they're the ones that were more famously noted, I guess.
Correct.
You know, times were hard back then anyway. And if you could make what's the word I want to use here, a luxurious living by digging up dead bodies or murdering people and taking their bodies, you know, and selling them to these institutes, why not, right?
It's a way to make a living.
Back then. It just goes to show you that people will do a lot of sick things in the name of money, okay? How many murders have been committed over money? So, yeah, I can see where somebody, if they, you know, if they couldn't obtain fresh bodies from the graveyard, they would start to obtain them somewhere else. You know, because it...
Well, not just for money. I mean, Ed Gein was digging up graves and using, you know, making things out of their body parts.
Yeah, but, you know, I was specifically talking about, you know, these guys did this in the name of money.
Yeah, well, back then, yeah.
And the other sick people, of course, did their things for whatever purpose they did them for. Like John Wayne Gacy and his sexual pervertness, you know. That one dude that you were talking about, you know, that killed his family.
Oh, yeah, Johnny Millis.
Why? What did his family do to him? You know,
nothing.
It showed you that people can snap and do some crazy shit.
Yeah, I mean, he killed his family and then remarried and had children with someone else. It's like, you know, it doesn't make any sense.
You know, and I guess to them, he was their old dad.
Yeah. And you're going to come home and shoot my son, you know, right in the head. I mean,
go to your son's soccer game and watch him play soccer and then take him home and kill him, you know?
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Yeah, it's beyond me. It's beyond me. Well, this was a great show. I want to thank you, Roger.
Well, thank you.
Thank everyone in chat.
And we both want to apologize for the show not being on last night. Google was being a pain.
Yeah.
And it stayed a pain up until about 3-something today when it finally allowed me to get in there. So I just didn't close it because I was back in. So, yeah, it was open for a few hours before the show started. Anyway.
Next week we have Demons and Evil Spirits.
Next week we have Demons and Evil Spirits. Wednesday, the return of Ghostly Stories will be on, same time. The following Monday, I can't remember what we got scheduled for the following Monday. Do you, off the top of your head?
The Monday after that?
Yeah.
We have Ghost Towns.
Okay, Ghost Towns, and then the next coming Wednesday, which is the 22nd, Half Past Dead Paranormal will have JP Doyle on. And he's a fun-loving guy that loves the paranormal, so you guys are gonna like him. But anyway.
Yeah, we got a great month lined up for everybody. So
we have got stuff lined up, and we have shows scheduled all the way through the 27th of July for Paranormal Graveyard, so you guys can look forward to that every Monday for a little while. You have to put up with us for a couple of hours every Monday, at least for a few weeks now. So, but thanks a lot, everybody in the chat room. We appreciate you. Couldn't do a show without you. Thanks, Frank, for coming. Thank you, Janice, for coming. And everybody else that I didn't get to mention. We appreciate you guys dropping in. Hope you'll come back next time.
Absolutely.
With that being said, we will see you guys next week. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.